Rachel! Give me a water! Yeah. There we are.
Oh, you can see me. Hi, everyone.
Are we gonna put that camera in the bathroom? We gonna put that camera in Cameron's voice's fluid? Hey, someone give me these.
Dude, that was really funny.
I don't see you on the stage anymore.
Emily, I'm about to do 2 ponies over again.
I don't think so. I think absolutely not.
I did it in school today.
Oh, good. You got some money on me. Welcome to Encounter.
Maybe some ponies too.
Adam. There's what it looks like.
Thank you.
Oh, did you understand?
Read it.
No cap.
I was gonna say
We're wrapping up our series on friendship today.
You got announcements?
Pick those announcements.
Hey guys, hey, welcome here. Can we see if we can run through our announcements real quick?
Yeah, coming up. Okay, so on Sunday, October 13th, everyone mark that in your calendars right now. 30 for 30 at the Harmons. Who's gonna be there? I know Carlos. That's right. Woo! Get those hands up. So it's gonna be really fun to be there, be square. Next, fall retreat. That's like the height of the year. So November 8th through 10th, the forms are actually downstairs on that podium thing. That's a BCYG facility. The youth table. So like, go to the youth table, get a form, and turn it in because you're gonna want to be there. You don't want to miss this. It's gonna be so fun. Next.
Forms are due October 13th.
Forms are due the day we also go to the Harmons, guys.
Very true.
Bring it to the Harmons.
So yeah, make sure you follow and subscribe and like and all that. Here are all of our social medias.
We have a YouTube.
Texting,
We have a YouTube.
Instagram, YouTube, which is where we're live right now. What's up, my fans? Okay, so there we go.
Everyone give Emily a hand. Nicely done. Hey, but seriously, make sure we get those forms in. Fall retreat forms are due in a few weeks. If you don't have one, they are on the table, but I also have them up here. I'll put them out on one of these tables so you can grab one and go. One thing of note, Linda Brooks, tonight. So if you want to get yours notarized, I know that's an issue having to go to the bank and do all that. If you have yours filled out and want to get it notarized tonight, she will be available after Encounter to do that. Okay, so find her, give her your parents, and
She turned 71 yesterday.
Aw, did she? I need to sing her a happy birthday when she comes up here. All right, that's very cool. All right, hey, we're gonna go ahead and go into our worship part of Encounter. So let's take a deep moment. Hey guys, I want to start off in a prayer. But even after my prayer, the multimedia worship is a little bit different. There's about 30 seconds before we start worshiping of just quiet time, of blank time, where I want you to kind of help refocus and recenter your minds as we go into worship, okay? Because we only worship like for roughly 15 minutes, but I want those 15 minutes to be intentional, okay? Everything we've talked about, whether it's being intentional with our friends, we have to be intentional about things we're doing. Because if not, we let things that aren't part of here kind of go into our minds and go into this place. So when we enter worship, our minds aren't really where they need to be. So let's use these 30 seconds, use this time in prayer to kind of refocus, recenter where we're at, and be real in the moments of what we're doing, all right? So if you wouldn't mind, let's pray together, and we'll go ahead and jump into our worship time. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for Encounter. I thank you so much for every person here. I thank you for the opportunity it is to have a relationship with you. God, I just pray for this night. As tonight we come together, we're going to raise our voices to praise you because you alone are worthy of our praise. And I just ask that in this moment of worshiping you, that our hearts are lifted, our minds are clear to things of this world, and that we're focused on you and just how awesome of God you are. God, we just want to thank you for the ways that you've blessed us, the ways you've loved us, the ways you've shown us grace. And God, we're so in awe of the God that you are. We just pray that this moment of worship is a time that is centered on you. We love you so much. In your sons, and we pray. Amen.
You call these pieces, broken and scattered, in mercy gathered, mended and whole, empty-handed, but not forsaken. I've been set free. I've been set free. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. Ooh, I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. Oh, I can see you now. Oh, I can see the love in your eyes. Laying yourself down, raising up the broken to life. Take our failure, you take our weakness, you set your treasure in jars of clay.
finishing up our Real Friends series tonight, all right? So we kind of do a quick recap of everything we've talked about so far. The first week, we talked about how you can be a better friend. We talked about you initiating, being a servant friend. We talked about the example of Jesus washing the apostles' feet and how he loved them, and how we can be friends, how we can make and take that first step to be a good friend to others. And then last week, we talked about how important it is to guard your inner circle. We talked about how our closest friends determine who we become. And so we have to guard those people that are around us. We talked about how we can choose those that are in our inner circle. And this week we're going to talk about something a little different. We're going to talk about how sometimes our friendships change, right? And sometimes they change for good. Sometimes our friendships change for the better. Like you have someone that's acquaintance, like you just met them on your math class, but all of a sudden now they're a decent friend, now they're a better friend. All of a sudden you're best friends with this person in your math class. Like that's a good change, but that's not really what we're talking about tonight. Tonight we're going to talk about a different type of change. We're going to talk about the inevitable reality that sometimes friendships end. Friends part ways and friendships end, right? This is a reality we've all been faced with, and sometimes it just kind of happens naturally, but sometimes other stuff gets in the way, right? Sometimes it's difficult reasons, they're different reasons. Maybe you changed schools and it made it more difficult to stay in touch. All of a sudden, the guy who's in your middle school you're best friends with isn't in your high school. Or maybe you moved and now you're in a different town. Or maybe your schedule's changed. All of a sudden, the person you had every single class with, all of a sudden you don't anymore. You just don't see them as much as you did before. Or maybe you both change and you just don't have the same common interest. And the things you once had in common, you don't have in common anymore. And because of that, just naturally, your friendship ends, right? This all happens. I remember when I was in middle school, my best friend was named Josh. Remember me last week telling you about the time I was arrested in the movie theater? Yeah, he was right beside me, also arrested. And so me and Josh were thick as thieves, like literally. And so we were tight, we were cool. But then my parents decided, hey, we're going to move to this small town called Chapel Hill, right? And I was not for that. And so we moved there, and all of a sudden me and Josh were like, hey, I know we're going to school, so he went to Independence. I went to Forest High School. We're like, hey, we're going to make this work. I was about to turn 16, just a few months. I was like, dude, I'll drive up here. And I did for a while, right? Like, we tried. I went to some Independence football games. I did this and that. But all of a sudden, like, I made friends where I was at. He made friends where he was at. And all of a sudden, it wasn't that big of a deal. We ended up going to 2 different colleges. Like, I'm still Facebook friends with him. I wasn't in his wedding. He wasn't in my wedding. Like, friendships just naturally grow apart like they should. Some of you are like, that's really sad, Preston. No, it happens. Like, it's life. If it hasn't happened to you yet, it will. Like, I'm sorry. But I hope your best friend right now is your long-term best friend. But it doesn't always happen that way. But sometimes it's not even as easy as that. Sometimes it doesn't even happen naturally. Sometimes friendships break up for other reasons, right? Sometimes the reason we change friendship, they're not cut and dry. For example, maybe your friend had a difference of opinion about something. And whether it was their behavior, their choices, the decisions they were making, you had a very sharp disagreement. And for some reason, neither one of you was going to change, so all of a sudden, your friendship did. Or maybe you had a friend who hurt you with words or actions, and you just couldn't get past the things that they have done to you or things that they said to you, and all of a sudden, they didn't change, but your friendship did. Maybe you had a friend who started walking a different path and you recognized that. You said, hey, that's just not where I'm going. You had to make a decision that your friendship had to change. Your friendship had to end. And some of you have gone through that already, but some of you haven't. And I'm here to be the breaker of bad news. If that hasn't happened, there's a chance it's probably going to happen. For me, middle schoolers, it happened when I became a freshman. I don't know what it is. For some reason, when you go from 8th grade to 9th grade, it seems like everyone has to redefine themselves. And for some of my friends, they decide to redefine themselves in other ways. They decide to hang out with other groups of people that I wasn't willing to do. And so we find this moment of, hey, what are we going to do? When we find ourselves in a moment where we know a friendship needs to end, how do we handle it well? Like when you recognize, okay, they're going a different path, and like, hey, they're cool, and I can be friendly, but like, I got to end this. How do you do that? How do you do that well? Believe it or not, we're actually going to look at an example from the Bible. Like, hey, Bible gives example on friendship. How does this old, outdated book give us updated friendship advice? Believe it or not, even though the book is over 2,000 years old, we have so much information that still relates to us today. We're reading the book of Acts. If you've been with us through our 30 for 30s, we've been journeying through the book of Acts. And I've loved this experience with you. If you haven't been with us, the way I describe the book of Acts is like the Gospels part 2. You know, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they're known as their Gospels. They're the life of Jesus, the life, the death, resurrection of Jesus. And then Acts is part 2. Like, Acts is what happens after that. So Acts 1, Jesus is ascending in the clouds. And then it's left with the 12 apostles like, hey, what do we do? So they take the message of the gospel, and their goal is to spread to the ends of the earth, right? To Judea and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And so that's what they're doing. And they're going out and they're telling people the story of Jesus, and people are starting to become followers of Christ, also later known as Christians, right? And so this is going on, and all this is happening. In the middle of this huge movement towards Christianity, this movement of them sharing the gospel, there's this moment where even Jesus' followers have this huge disagreement. Even two great friends have this sharp disagreement, and they have to decide, hey, what are we going to do about this? Some are thinking, what? Jesus followers have disagreements? Never, right? Yeah, it happens. It happens in the Bible. It happens in Acts 15. It's actually right where we left off from last third for 30 at the link for Acts chapter 15. And our three players in this scenario are a guy named Paul. A lot of you know Paul. He wrote a third of the New Testament, right? One of the greatest missionaries ever. He's out spreading the gospel. Paul's already completed one full missionary journey with Barnabas, and there's your second guy, Barnabas. He was known as a great encourager. He financially supported a lot of these mission trips. Was known because of his encouragement. That's why his name Barnabas. And then there's a third guy that's in this story. And his name's John Mark. And John Mark is Barnabas' cousin, eventual writer of the Gospel of Mark. And he's also a major player of this story. Okay, so we're going to pick up John chapter 15, verse 36. Read along with me. It's on the screen here. Sometime later, Paul and Barnabas said, let us go back and visit the believers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord and see how they are doing. Now, I don't know if y'all remember Acts 14, what happened to Paul and Barnabas went to these places like Iconium and Lystra and Derbe. They weren't really welcomed. And so they're saying, hey, let's go check on these churches we planted, and let's make sure that everything's going well. And say, hey, this sounds like a great idea. Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with him. That's where we get John Mark. But Paul did not think it wise to take him. Why? Because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. All right, so let me kind of break down what's going on here. Barnabas wants to bring his little cousin, John Mark. Hey, let's bring John Mark, who apparently ditched him the last time we hung out. And I don't know if you've ever been ditched by anyone, but it's not a good feeling, right? So apparently they're on this missionary journey, and they're like, hey, we're going to bring John Mark. And they're like, hey, it's time to go. Where's John Mark? And he's not here with us. You ever had that with a friend where you decide to go somewhere, like, hey, we're going to go to this event together, and you show up at the event, and then they just run off, and you're there by yourself. You don't know anyone. You're like, hey, what's going on? Like, that's the feeling Paul obviously had. Because he's like, hey, we're not bringing this dude again. This dude is flaky, okay? And so John Mark is out in Paul's eyes. He said, this isn't happening. We can't do it because of what had happened last time. He stood us up before. Why would we want to bring him along again? So check out what happens next, verse 39. They had sharp disagreement that they, Paul and Barnabas, parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, but Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the believers to the grace of the Lord. He went through Syria and Cilicia, strengthening the churches. That escalated quickly, right? All of a sudden, hey, I want to bring this guy. I don't want to bring this guy. Boom, sharp disagreement. In biblical words, sharp disagreement is a big fight, not a physical fight, but a verbal fight. Like they disagree heavily on this issue of to bring John Mark or not. So much so they said, hey, you know what? We're not even going to do this missionary journey to get together. Like we did it last time. It went great last time, whatever. You go your way, I'll go my way. I'll take him, you take him. And they split company. And for like, if you're outside reader, you're like, man, these are two heroes of the faith. Like, how can they not get it together? How can they not understand? How can they not make this work? But what we got to understand is they decided the best thing to do was to separate. And the big lesson we can learn from this is sometimes in relationships, the best thing to do is to separate. Now, I'm all about unity, and I'm all about being one. But there's sometimes in friendships, and they notice this, that sometimes the best thing to do is to go our separate ways. What I love about this, the writer of Acts, which is Luke, he goes on to tell us what happens. He says that one went this way and one went the other. But check out what they did. They commended others. They went ahead and went on with the mission trip. And what I love about this is I can just picture the devil seeing this scenario and seeing this big fight. And they're like, hey, man, the devil's working. He's got two Jesus followers, two of the greatest heroes of the faith this time, battling each other. The devil's thinking, I got my work. Like, I did it. Like, I've done it. And then all of a sudden, God says, hey, hold up. He sends them both on separate missionary journeys. And all of a sudden, instead of just one missionary trip, now we have two. You see, that's what we see throughout the book of Acts. Is God takes what the devil thinks is good, and he turns it into a doubling for advancing the kingdom. And we see it throughout the book of Acts. We see it with the stoning of Stephen. We see it with the life of Paul. God does these things, but there's a bigger lesson here. Maybe not bigger, but there's another lesson here about friendship that I don't want us to miss. And that's what I want us to see here is what we see in Paul and Barnabas, and that's this, that you can be friendly without being friends. You can be nice to one another without being best friends. It happens in our world. You can, like Paul and Barnabas, have a friendship-ending disagreement while still going on in your life in a way that doesn't impact you or the other person for the worse. Some of you have seen friendships end. Some of you have been a part of that. It's usually not a pretty sight. But what we see in Paul and Barnabas is it doesn't always have to be that way. There's ways we can move on without hurting one another, without talking bad about one another. You can still treat them well when you're in the same place. You can speak well of them when their name comes up. You can move forward with your life just like they can move forward with their life. But how often do we see that? How often do we see two friends split up and then they're talking good about them, they're talking good about them? It just doesn't go that way. But what does it see in the story is it can. Here's a huge part I don't want you to miss. You can move on with integrity. Does everyone know what that word integrity means? It means you can move on with your character, your morals, the way that you live life, the way that you carry yourself. Your integrity is intact. Just because you end a friendship doesn't mean you have to talk bad about someone. Just because you end a friendship doesn't mean you have to badmouth them on their back. Doesn't mean you have to tell the stories that maybe no one else is here to share some of their secrets that they've given to you in confidence. You can move on with integrity. That's what Paul and Barnabas showed us. Being friendly without being friends sounds easy, but it's actually hard to do. We tend to say things after we've broken up a friendship. Hey, we were never really that close. That's not that big of a deal. I always knew that friendship wouldn't last. Why I refer to stuff like this. But here's another point I'm going to give you. A friendship that doesn't have a future doesn't discount what it was in the past. Just because you're not friends now doesn't mean you have to discount what you were before. This goes with relationships and friendships as well. We don't have to talk bad about someone just because it's not working out right now. And this can be huge for some of you guys as you go into your life, as you continue on in your teenage years, to never burn these bridges, to never talk bad about people when we don't have to. Friendships are complex. Now, some of you may be asking, how does this work, right? This sounds great. It sounds great to do this, but how do we do this? I'm going to give you 2 quick points here. Number 1, choose what you think about the other person. And I say the word choose on purpose because you have that option to think what you want about someone. Now, we live in a culture where when we separate friendships, we automatically think worse, we think the worst about someone. I'm telling you to assume the best. To assume that they're sharing good things about you. To assume that the things they're saying are what good friends would do, even if you're not friends anymore. Always assume the best about someone. Never assume the worst. We always tend to assume the worst, but you can choose what you think about that person. And when friendships have to end, choose well what you think about the person. Last, choose what you do. So choose to actually do what's right by the person. Choose to speak well of them. Choose to show them kindness and respect when you see them. Choose to be the one to take the high road, even when it's difficult. Man, it says a lot about you when a friendship breaks up, and even if they're going around talking something about you, you still stand up for them. It says, hey, I'm not sure if that's true, but I think well of this person. Hey, maybe this friendship didn't work out, but they're still a good person. Man, can we as Christians take the high road in our friendships, even when they don't work out, so that we can lift someone else up? We talked about that week 1, about lifting others up, and that was the story of Jesus. And we see that so much in the life of Jesus, even those that hated him, he found ways to lift them up, didn't he? Even those that betrayed him, he found ways to lift them up. And as Christians, we're called to, even when people are saying bad things about us, for us to take the high road, to turn the other cheek, as Jesus would say. You can be friendly without being friends. I want to wrap this series up with just one last thought. We've talked a lot about friendships. Maybe you said the series, man, I got issues with my friends, I got good friends, I got to worry about this. But I hope you've taken this to heart. Because your friends truly do have an impact on you. The people around you really do change who you are. And as you move in from middle school to high school or to college or wherever stage of life you are, you will always, your friend group's going to change, but it's always going to be important. Even when you're an adult, man, my friends group, it's so important to me to have the right people around me because it affects who I am. Everything around you in your environment is going to change who you are. Make sure you're guarding that inner circle. Make sure you're making the initiative to be a good friend. Make sure you're the one reaching out to those and showing the kindness and being a servant as a friend. But also make sure that when friendships do have to end, that we're ending the right way. And that we're holding our integrity intact while we're doing that. I know that's not an easy task to ask for, but as Christians, that's what we're called to, that higher standard. All right, I'm going to pray us out. You're going to have time to talk about this in your small groups. Thank you guys for being here. I really appreciate you guys. Let's pray together. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for tonight. We thank you for the example of Paul and Barnabas, God, that even in rough times of time disagreement, they could show godliness in such a manner. God, I pray for that for every one of us. as we all have difficulties with friends, we all have struggles and disagreements. God, help us to take that high road to show the character of God in these moments. Even the moments where we want to say something, we want to do something we know we shouldn't. God, help us to have the boldness and the heart of Christ in these moments. Thank you so much for your love for us and the examples you've given us in your word. Help us to be more like you each and every day. In your sons, and we pray. Amen.
Amen.